Helen Zille has written another letter. Another letter from Helen Zille. During the GNU negotiations, she was one of the most active letter writers, and she was going into a back and forth with the ANC in public. And that is something that I think created a lot of friction in those negotiations. This letter has been leaked to the media. And fundamentally, what the letter says is that the DA is giving the ANC an ultimatum. The ultimatum is that they must re-elect Cilliers Brink as the Tshwane Mayor, or the party will withdraw from negotiations to stabilise 3 other metros, right? So this letter is trying to find a pressure point to pressure the ANC to undo the deal that they've made with Action SA. And that deal also pertains to the moves that have been made in Johannesburg. So apparently this letter was sent on Friday to Fikile Mbalula, the Secretary General of the ANC, and David Makhura, the head of political training in the ANC. In this letter, Helen Zille states that she's aware of significant efforts that Mbalula and Makhura have made in the past few weeks to convince their Gauteng colleagues that a stability government between the parties should be reached, which would come into effect in various metropolitan municipalities across the country. The affected metros being Tshwane, eGuruletani, eThekwini in KwaZulu-Natal, and Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape. Right? Tshwane and eGuruletani are obviously in Gauteng. Here's what the letter specifically says. Here's what Helen Zille says. The purpose of this letter is to make it clear that Thursday's events in Tshwane mark the end of the progress we have made nationwide in our negotiations on various models for cooperation in metropolitan municipalities where no party governs with a majority. The DA will now withdraw from these talks. The ANC must take responsibility for the ongoing chronic instability in these metros and the associated service delivery failures leading up to South Africa's local government elections in 2026. The return of Cilliers Brink as executive mayor of Tshwane is non-negotiable for these talks to continue. The ANC must take note of the anger in the capital towards the parties responsible for the removal of Mayor Brink. Helen Zille says that it's unfortunate that the progress made has been undone so quickly by the stubbornness of the ANC's Gauteng leadership under the direction of Panyaza Lesufi. She goes on to say, until the ANC's national leadership reaffirms its authority in Gauteng, the metros in our most densely populated provinces will continue to disintegrate with extremely negative economic consequences, as she concludes her letter. So that's what she said. Panyaza Lesufi has responded to her on social media, on Twitter. This is what he said. Koko at Helen Zille. The decision to support the motion of no confidence was taken by the National Working Committee of the ANC, and no amount of propaganda and misuse of media houses will change that narrative. The decision to not incorporate the DA in the Gauteng government of provincial unity was also taken by the national leadership of the ANC. The sooner you accept this reality, the sooner the healing process will begin. The Bella Bill was approved by the ANC National Executive Subcommittee on Education and Health and fully voted by all MPs of the ANC in Parliament, not Gauteng. Insult us as you wish, call us names like rogue as you wish. Reality is the ANC will never be a branch of the DA. Amandla! He doesn't say Amandla. That's just me adding it. Then in another tweet, after she said he was lying, he said, Oksalayo, you will never dictate terms to us members of the ANC. Never. You can bring all your media friends and media houses. The ANC is not for sale. The ANC is one. There's no provincial ANC, no local ANC. We are one ANC, not a federal movement. Amandla! I'm adding the Amandlas. There's no Amandlas in the remarks. So clearly, different interpretations of what's happening from the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. It does not seem, though, that Helen Zille will be able to get what she's looking for. Here are my comments. Number one, the DA will complain about the removal of Cilliers Brink as mayor of Tshwane, but they're not going to leave the GNU because of this. I think that, one, they've put themselves in a corner by saying that they are so afraid of seeing MK and EFF being in coalition with the ANC that they've given the ANC a lot of leverage. And they've said that in public, they've been saying, we don't want the doomsday coalition. We don't want the doomsday coalition. When you go around saying that you don't want that, and that is the worst case scenario, the other person listening says, okay, so I've got these guys. They're here. They are hostages of their own fear of the MK and the EFF. Plus, they're also hostages to their donor interests. For example, the founder of Capitec donated 73 million rands or thereabouts, slightly more actually, than 73's Martin Moshal in total. He donated over 100 million rands, and primarily all of that money went to the Democratic Alliance, the owner of Capitec, or one of the owners of Capitec, and he's benefited from the market response to the DA-ANC coalition. He's not going to necessarily support the decision to walk out of this coalition, which is good for his bank and has made his bank billions in terms of market cap valuations. So they're not going to want this. They're not going to want this. So the DA is not only captive to their own framing and messaging, they are captive to the interests of the donors, the interest of the markets, who they said that they were going to try to help and use those markets to try to force the ANC into particular positions. So I don't think that they'll leave because of this. I still think that there's anger building, there's resentment building, because they realize right now that they went in trying to be a co-pilot to this particular plane, to be able to land particular interests that they have. Now they are a VIP observer within the coalition, but they are not a driver, they are a passenger, and they may be going towards the back seat as a result of this. Gayton McKenzie may end up having more influence in that coalition than they may, because of just their approach and their rhetoric and their abrasiveness towards the ANC. And still, internally in this coalition, there's still a recognition that everyone is still competing for votes. There are elections coming up, and there are two parties that could benefit from under-delivery and failure. So, and those parties are EFF and MK, right? Because they're still there. MK got 2.5 million votes in their first election. And if these guys mess up, those votes will go up and the dynamics will shift in provinces such as Mpumalanga, provinces such as KZN, where the MK may govern outright without needing any other party to join them. So these are dynamics that everyone is very well aware of, right? So that's the first thing. The thing that they are going to potentially leave this coalition as a result of is, I think, the NHI policy. That's a big one that the donors will support, and also that their voter base will support. If there's any progress in the NHI much further, this could be a reason for them to leave. It's interesting that Panyaza said that the Bella bill was approved by the ANC NEC subcommittee on education and health. That is apparently an important subcommittee, and it's also dealing with the issues of health. So if that subcommittee is influencing a lot of these decisions, it may very well be that they'll push ahead with the NHI, and that could potentially lead to a fall of the GNU as it stands right now. But that could happen at a point where even if the DA walks away, it doesn't change anything, because now the ANC has tested what happens if they are in a minority government, so to speak. Is the DA necessarily going to destabilize things to the point where the situation is ungovernable? No, they're still going to be able to get a vote by vote support from MK, from EFF, from Action SA, from Patriotic Alliance. So the DA's say is not really going to shift the dynamics so much, and that's what puts the DA in a compromising position. Then it adds this strategic decision that they have to make, is that if they walk away, then they have to leave the cabinet positions and influence in government. Will they be willing to do that? I'm willing to bet that not so much, because they're going to be thinking, well, agriculture is still important, forestry and fisheries is still important, basic education is still important, communication is still important. Let's hold on to these portfolios and see what we can do with them Public Works, we can still do something. So they're really not in a position of leverage right now, is the end of this particular first point. Number two is psychologically, the DA seems to be going through the 5 stages of grief. If you remember what those are, the 5 stages of grief, commonly known as the Kubler-Ross model, were introduced by psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her 1969 book on death and dying. These stages provide a framework for understanding the emotional responses individuals may experience following a loss. The stages are in order, right? Denial. The initial stage involves shock, disbelief regarding the loss. Individuals may feel numb or try to carry on as if nothing has happened, as the reality of the situation is too overwhelming to accept immediately. Then the second stage is anger. As denial fades, individuals may feel intense anger, go onto Twitter, start arguing with Panyaza Lesufi, start shouting at Herman Mashaba. The anger may be directed at themselves, others, or even inanimate objects, often stemming from feelings of helplessness and frustration about the situation. Then the third stage, bargaining, where you send a letter to Fikile Mbalula and David Makhura. In this stage, individuals may attempt to negotiate with the higher power or themselves to reverse or lessen the loss. Reverse the loss. That's interesting, because what the DA is asking for, Helen Zille in particular, she's saying, please put my boy back. Please put Cilliers Brink back as mayor. This often involves what if or if only statements reflecting a desire to regain control over the situation, right? Then the fourth stage is depression. This stage encompasses deep feelings of sadness and despair as individuals begin to confront the reality of their loss. It can manifest as withdrawal from social interactions and a sense of hopelessness. The fifth stage is acceptance. This is where the DA is not reached yet. The final stage involves coming to terms with the reality of the loss. Acceptance does not mean that individuals are okay with what happened, but signifies that they are beginning to find a way to move forward with their lives. So I think that the DA is going through these 5 stages of grief basically. Right. Third point, and this is about hypocrisy. The DA is being hypocritical. They want to choose which ANC they like and which ANC they can work with while preventing other parties from making the same decisions. Every party is sovereign to itself. It's an independent entity competing for vote share. If the DA thinks that the ANC in KZN is worth working with, while they were actually telling us that the ANC in KZN is corrupt, that proves the contradiction. When Mayor Papas was campaigning and others were campaigning in KZN, they consistently spoke about how corrupt the ANC in KZN was, but they went into coalition with them, right? So that proves the hypocrisy of the situation. They cannot say, actually, say Gauteng GP is corrupt, but Gauteng KZN, ANC KZN, sorry, not Gauteng GP, ANC GP is corrupt, but ANC KZN is not corrupt, when they were saying that the same entity is corrupt. They cannot do that, right? They cannot tell Action SA who they can make deals with, right? Or insist that they're the only ones who can catch corruption if a coalition is entered into. Because part of the DA version is that, listen, let us go in, we'll catch the corrupt ones. You had a whole guy there in your MEC positions in Cape Town who was corrupt. You didn't catch him. So, he was caught by the police, not by you. So you guys are not necessarily better at catching the corrupt than anybody else. Malusi Boy is the name that I'm referring to, right? Also, let's be honest about some of the issues around the DA leadership in Gauteng. Solim Simanga, the leader of the DA in Gauteng, has had accusations of corruption himself. He hired bodyguards into executive positions when he was mayor of Tshwane. He had some story there where some guy gave him a bloody nose, a bloody face, all over his lip was bleeding and bust. This guy said that Soli owed him $1 million. He hadn't paid him back. Then after the videos went viral, Jiggy, they came back and they were hugging each other saying no problem. That story was never fully looked into. It was never fully explained, never ventilated. That was, I think, a mistake of the investigative journalist, because that story just was so fishy. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the DA is not the only entity that is capable of spotting when any government officials make corrupt deals or tenders or whatever. The benefit of the doubt has to be given to Action SA, that they have the same capacity, that Patriotic Alliance can do the same thing, that you name it, ACDP can do the same thing. They're not the only ones who can do that. It's not intrinsic capability of the Democratic Alliance exclusive to anybody else. It's about honesty and integrity, and they cannot be the ones insisting that they have honesty and integrity. Malusi, boy, your guy, who you made MEC for human settlements in Cape Town, was working with gangs. You didn't catch it for years. There was no integrity in that. There's so many other DA people who have been implicated as well in funny stories, and you haven't necessarily taken accountability for the fact that you're not infallible. The DA is not, the Democratic Heavenly Alliance sent to us by the Archangel Gabriel or anything like that. They're just mere human beings operating in politics like other mere human beings, and they cannot claim to be the angels of democracy. Right? Just because your party is named Democratic doesn't mean that you are the prefects and head boys and head girls of democracy. That's it. That's the reality. So that's the status. I wonder what you guys think. I wonder what you guys think about this ultimatum from Helen Zille. Do you think it's going to change anything within the ANC? Do you think that it's going to shift anybody? Or do you think that it's a waste of time at this particular point? Right. That's all the time we have for this episode. Till the next one.